Here we're going to take a look at Creo Parametric 6 updates. So some of the more noticeable changes that you may find between Creo 5 and 6. This isn't meant to be all-encompassing, but it is supposed to be the most noticeable differences that a user might find and deal with when making the transition. Um, Overview, basically we're going to break down the updates based on different aspects of Creo, whether it's fundamental changes, part design, assembly, surfacing, detailed drawings, or sheet metal. There are no specific changes that are that noticeable for surfacing, so that is actually going to be ignored, but the other ones will be covered. First thing you may notice is that generally some of the dashboards have been updated. Um, with the old interface, all of the commands were kind of linearly listed within the dashboard. Here we're looking specifically at extrude, but it's in a variety of different commands. In the 6.0 update, the extrude has the same functions, but they've been reorganized. We can see that solid and surface are above one another, remove and thin walls are above one another. Um, Also, there's a little graphic here that displays that you're doing an extrude function. Instead of just having the name listed, it shows us a little picture of what you're trying to perform on this model. Functionally doesn't change the way things work necessarily, but it does update the look of it a little bit. Something you'll also notice is that it gives us a little text box over here on the right describing what is needed to be able to perform that function. Another update to Creo is the mini toolbar. While the mini toolbar was introduced in 4.0, now you're going to be able to use it while editing a feature. So before, if you selected on something, just by selecting on it, you were able to see the mini toolbar appear, but once you started editing it, the mini toolbar wasn't available within the dashboard when you're actually modifying the command. Now, when you select on something and edit it, whether you use the mini toolbar or not, when you're editing it itself, there's a mini toolbar as well. You can select on an edge or a surface or a point or whatever it might be. It'll show you the mini toolbar of the functions that would be available to us in our dashboard anyway. If you right click as well, you will see the contextual menu appear. Now, some of the things that used to be in the contextual menu have now been added to that mini toolbar. So, for example, Edit Internal Sketch used to be available if you right clicked on it. Now, when you select on it, this icon is Edit Internal Sketch. It gives us that function. Um, Another update is when you're modifying a feature and you have dimensions, you have the option to have this little window display behind the dimensions. It helps it stand out a little bit against the background of the model. If you want to turn that on or off, what you would do is go to View, go to the Show group, and you have this icon right here. It looks like a little box with a 10 dimension on it, an eyeball. You can either turn that on or off, and it will display the window or it'll turn off that graphics window. Okay, the old interface did not have that little option. Also, when you're modifying a dimension, if you hover over that dimension, it will show you drop-down menus on the right and left side. Again, these are directly attached to the dashboard that's going on at the same time. So you can always go to the top of your screen, control the dashboard. But if I hit the drop-down arrow for that option to the left, it will show me different depth options. If I go to the right, I can make it go in both directions, or I can change it what elements I'm dealing with. Before, in older versions, you had to right click on the little dot at the end of the extrusion to be able to get that to show up. And it's not just for extrusion, it can happen in the revolve command or any other command where you're defining a depth or an angle. Um, Also, an improvement to Creo 6 is if you have your navigator on the left, you've always had the ability to be able to add columns to the table or to the tree. To do this, you would go into settings and you'd be able to customize the tree, and we'd be able to add whatever information we want. As long as that information was filled out in the model, it would now show up in the tree. In the old setup, you would have to grab the handle on the right hand side of the navigator and either stretch it to get bigger or stretch it to get smaller, back and forth, or you could adjust the column sizes by grabbing the handles here and manipulating them. However, now we're given this button when you add columns. If you haven't added columns, it won't be there. But once you add columns, this icon allows you to quickly collapse and expand the tree so that you can turn them on when you need them and turn them off when they're in the way. Just select on it once, it collapses, click on it again, it expands and shows those columns for us. Also, a change that's happened is by default, features, suppressed objects, and annotations in the part and assembly tree will automatically be displayed. So in older versions of Creo, let's say you suppressed a couple of objects, they would immediately disappear. You could always go to settings and customize the filter to be able to show those suppressed objects, but you had to remember to go turn those on. Now by default, they're already turned on for you. Changing from fundamental changes to part design specific changes, when you're building a datum point, inside the datum point command, there's a new project command or function. First, what you'll do is you will select on an existing datum point, curve, endpoint, or vertex. After selecting the point that you're starting from, you'll choose the datum point command. You'll see the point you selected on listed here. If you hit the drop down arrow, you'll be able to choose project. And now you get to select what you're projecting it onto. You can project it onto a surface, a datum plane, or an edge or a line. Select on that other reference by holding Control, and when you hit OK, it'll project it normal to that reference. Also, a minor change that you may notice is that when you are creating an extrusion for the first time, the value of the extrusion, the formula they use to guess that number, has changed. I don't know what it was, how it was coming up with the old value, but it basically picked a value to be able to adjust that extrusion. If it guessed wrong, you had to go in and adjust it, but that number could be all over the place. Now, the formula bases it on the sketch that you're using. So here I drew a sketch of a square with sides that were 5 millimeters long. Well, when I go to extrude it, it averages out all the dimensions there and comes up with the average value, which, since it was all 5 is the extrusion value. Now you can change it to be whatever you'd like, but it tries to guess how far you want this extruded based on the dimensions you actually put into the sketch. Okay, involves less zooming in and zooming out to be able to adjust the extrusion value than the older context did. Another small improvement is when you are building a helical volume, helical sweep, or helical sweep, either one, you still build it the same way you did before. However, under the References drop-down menu, there's this option to create a helical trajectory curve. Okay, old setup did not have that. If you check that box, when you're building the volume helical sweep or helical sweep, either one, it'll still create the same geometry, but it also creates this wireframe helical curve that can be referenced. You can then select it and copy it and paste it if you want and just have the wireframe curve to work with. Sometimes it does get covered up by the volume, so it's hard to see. You may have to change your rendering style, like to wireframe, to be able to display specifically that curve if it's overlapping the solid that was generated. But you now have a curve to work with instead of just creating the result of the helix. The final change for part design specifically is there's been an update to the formula generating your midplane. So you build the midplane the same way you did before. You choose plane command, hold Control, choose one plane, another plane that are at an angle to one another. The idea is that the formula that's being used guesses better what midplane you actually want and doesn't require you to have to flip between bisector as much. So it tries to keep it over top the model instead of off to the side of the model. I chose these two green surfaces by holding Control and selecting both of them. It created this midplane, which is at a 45-degree angle relative to the green surfaces. If it does guess incorrectly, which it still could do, you can hit this drop-down arrow and pick the other bisector. It'll move 90 degrees and come in perpendicular, splitting the angle between those two perpendicular planes from the other side. Assembly design. So when dealing with assemblies, something that actually works in both assemblies and in part files is the reference viewer. So here I'm showing a part file, but it works the same in assemblies. Reference viewer allows us to see the dependencies between two objects, the parent-child relationships of how they're connected or how they're linked. However, the new function here is if you select on something, instead of just highlighting, you can right-click and say Zoom to, and it will zoom in on that specific object on the model or in that assembly. So if you've got a large assembly with lots of components, and you've got a small part that you know is constrained to some other bracket or feature, we can see that part, right click on it, say zoom to, and it will zoom in exactly where it is on the assembly as well. Another improvement that can affect both a part file in an assembly or just standing by itself is the inheritance feature. Inheritance feature is going to allow us to create customized components from an original piece of geometry. So if we've got a widget and now we want a new widget that's a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, we can have it inherit from the original widget and be able to change the dimensions that make it unique. The new function here is when you create a varied item, if you right click on that varied item, that inheritance feature, you'll see varied items available to us in the drop-down menu. That wasn't there before. When you select on it, it immediately shows us what dimensions are being controlled and gives us more direct access to being able to control those varied items. Okay, again, you can do that within a part filing by itself or within an assembly. Also, changes within the assembly. We have an update to the insert here and the activate command. So when we're dealing with the activate command, in the old setup, when you activated a component, it would simply put the little green dot next to it. Now, in the actual display, the part would be its normal display, but all the other parts would gray out. Okay, now, if I activate that same component, it is the same display in the tree where it's white, and all the other components gray out within the tree. So not only is that happening on the display of the assembly, but it's also happening in the tree, allowing you to focus more on specifically that component. Remember that features are automatically displayed within our Creo 6, whereas in the old setup, features are not automatically displayed. I'd have to go to settings and turn that on to be able to get them to be displayed. We can see that automatically, so that's also different. The other change with our tree in the assembly is the insert here. So in the old setup, insert here was listed underneath usually your top level assembly, and if you were looking at a specific part, it'd be listed underneath the part level as well. In Creo 6, the green line and the blue line represent the insert here. So it does the same thing, it just changed the way it looks. We've activated guide final vice part. So it is white while everything else is grayed out. But if I grabbed that little blue line and I drug it up, it would be able to go in a different location. It would automatically suppress the other components. I'd be able to drill a hole, and that hole would show up after first feature, but before the drilled pattern, or the patterned hole. And then I could grab that little blue line and drag it back down to the bottom, just adjusting where the insert here is. The green and blue just represent one is for the part file or the component, the other is for the assembly, and inserting components in the assembly. Another function change within, or minor change I should say, within Creo 6 is when you're using the intelligent fastener function, if you've already placed one fastener in a hole, basically of a pattern, and then using intelligent fastener to be able to place another one in a different location, if it's going to try to duplicate that fastener on top of an existing location, it will give you an error message. So it tells you a fastener exists in this reference. Do you want to continue? You can still double it up if you need to. I don't know why you would, but we maybe want to double it up because we're using a different one and then go and remove the old one after we're finished. But in older versions of Creo, it didn't recognize that one already existed in that hole, and you'd could end up with double fasteners. Detailed drawings. So when you're doing drafting changes within Creo 6, some of the noticeable differences are with the note command. There's a couple things that are changed about the note. Here we've already created a note with a leader line. We're modifying it, so we select on that note. If we then want to modify the text, we can click on Text Editor. Text editor allows us to type in whatever text we want, and we can insert symbols. If I choose this little icon here for symbols, something that's new is the ability to have my symbols kind of separated from the entire library of symbols that are available. If you're constantly using certain symbols in your drawings, they'll automatically be displayed here. As you pick a new symbol, it'll show up in the first of this list, and the oldest one will drop off. But it keeps a running total of for the 7 symbols that you've used recently. And if something else gets used, the oldest one gets dropped off for make room for the newer one. Another change that you may notice within the detailed drawing is if you create a dimension where a witness line is needed. So example here, we have a round that was placed on this corner. So the corner no longer exists, but we want to measure to where that corner would be. Now, I know you can just select this line and get the same thing, but some situations won't allow that. Well, in the old display, if you had enable witness lines turned on, or intersection witness lines, it would just come to a point. In the new setup, those lines overlap one another just a little bit. Now, the depth of that line can be controlled through settings in Creo if you really want to be able to adjust that. But by default, there will be overlapping as opposed to just a dot that it connects with. Also with notes, I said there was a number of changes. One change that you'll find is that the general interface for the dashboard has been updated. So here's the old interface, here's the new interface. You can see there's a lot more commands and customizations that can be done. Also, when you are placing a note, if you select on the reference you're tying it to, like this side, as you go to place the actual text, it will snap to different references. So here I moved it out where it's going to be perpendicular to that line. It shows it snapping there and I can place it. Or if I moved it up, it would let me know that it's tangent to that line. Okay, along with all the other references that you can customize and customization of semantic information to make sure that it's meeting your standard, that kind of stuff. Another update, which in my opinion is well overdue, is within the detailed drawings functions of Creo when you're building a new drawing file. So file new, select drawing from the list. There's a little checkbox down here to use drawing model file name. So whatever CAD file you are generating this drawing for, whether it's a part or an assembly, if you check that box, it'll automatically make your drawing file have the same name as your CAD file. Okay. If you turn it off, like you see here, we can type in whatever name we want, but it will automatically link the two and make them share the same name, which usually is what we want. Another minor modification is if you're dealing with a table and you click in a cell, the delete key will now delete the contents of that cell. Before, delete key would delete the entire table, but it would not delete the contents. In the past, you had to click on delete contents, which you could right click and choose that, or you could have gone to the dashboard and grabbed it. But now the delete key will also allow you to clear the contents of a cell. And the last set of changes we're going to cover is sheet metal functions within Creo. The first thing we're looking at for sheet metal is the flat feature. When using the flat feature to create walls, it will automatically detect neighboring walls and allow us to adjust the reliefs and corner seams of those neighboring walls without having to go back and modify them or build something on top of those elements. To show you examples of that here, I created a sheet metal bracket. I had one wall already placed. I'm building a secondary wall that happened to butt up against it. Well, in that secondary wall, before hitting the complete function, I went to corner treatment, one of the menu options, choose corner 1. I can adjust that corner and automatically adjust the neighboring wall as well. So when I say create with seam with a gap, 2 times the thickness of my sheet metal, it gives me this result. If I change that from gap to open, it gives me this result where they're butted up against one another, but the bottom is open. I can choose with overlap, and here one side is overlapping the other, so the front wall is overlapping the side wall. And here we flipped it by hitting the flip command. Now the side wall is overlapping the front wall. Also, if we go to the relief tab up here at the top, The relief tab gives me options to customize the corner relief. I can select on corner relief, choose my type. Here we did square, we could do round relief or tangent or whatever we might need. And it adjusts that corner relief for both walls at the same time. Now the mini toolbar does come into play when dealing with that flat or flange command. So as you are working with it, if you select on different references, you will get options to appear to be able to control the reliefs, to be able to control the bend, again, a little bit more quickly than necessarily having to go to the dashboard and choosing those options. Another update to Creo 6 regarding sheet metal is an improved regeneration performance when dealing with sheet metal cuts. So when you hit regenerate, it's supposed to regenerate faster. But it does this by ignoring certain types of features that have not been modified from previous steps. So if you build 20 features on top of one another, you build the 21st feature. If by building the 21st feature it didn't modify the first 20, it won't have to regenerate all of those. It'll just regenerate the ones that have been changed or modified and should update faster for us. And the last thing here is the merge wall commands has been modernized. Basically, the interface looks more like the standard Creo dashboard interface than it does the old Pro E interface that, if you've used Pro E in the past, you may be familiar with. To find your merge wall, what you would go to is we'd be able to build our sheet metal function, go to model, and I believe it's under the edit group. We'll be in the drop down menu. There's a merge wall. The new function will show us this, where we're able to select our references and our drop down menus. The old interface gave us a contextual menu where we were able to add or remove elements, able to define our features, and be able to hit OK to complete them. Here we're able to hit the check mark. And those are some of the updates, most noticeable changes and updates to Creo 6.
Taking a look at some of the fundamental changes that we have in Creo 6, the first thing you may notice is that some of the commands do have a different dashboard design to them. So for example, if I come over here to extrude, the icons and where things are located in the dashboard have changed. There's also kind of a description describing what is involved to create that feature. Here we're looking at extrude. If I hit cancel and go to build a revolve, we see that things are just located in a different spot, though functionally things still work the same way. You may notice a different slight design change. Other changes are when, while the mini toolbar is something that was added in 4.0, the mini toolbar is also available when editing a feature, not just when creating a feature. So you may have been familiar with, if I select on something, getting the mini toolbar to pop up when you're going to modify an element. However, when you go to modify that feature and actually get into editing that, the edit definition, now if I select on an element, we get a mini toolbar that pops up as well, allowing us to get to most of the same options we have in our dashboard. Things like being able to edit the internal sketch. Hit OK to that. If I select that feature, I could add a taper and be able to adjust the taper of that extrusion. I can be able to set it to a thin object. So a lot of these were available with a right-click contextual menu. The contextual menu will still appear, but the options are going to be changed from what was there before. A lot of the options have been added to the mini toolbar. All you have to do is select to get the mini toolbar to appear, right-click to get the contextual menu to appear while modifying an element. Another change that you may find, here I created modifications that I don't want, so I'm going to undo those, is enhanced display of dimensions. So if I select on a element that I want to modify and say edit definition, we will see that there is a box around the dimension, and when you hover over that dimension, you will see drop-down menus that allow us to, again, get to options that would normally be available to us in our dashboard or our mini toolbar. So here I can set my depth to be a blind depth with a value, make it symmetric so it goes in both directions, or I can say to selected and choose some reference it's going to go up to. Now I've changed it there. I can come back up here and change it back to a static value. Also, you'll notice that it puts this little white border around the dimension, or that color can change, but this border helps it stand out away from the model that you're working with. If you want to control the look of that, under View, under the Show group, there's an option to be able to turn that on or off, Dimension Background Display. So right now it's being displayed. If I turn that off, go back to Model, actually go back to Extrude, and set that value. Notice there's no border around the text, so it might disappear into the model or be harder to see. It doesn't stand out like it would normally. Hit OK to that, and we'll be able to do it. One other general or fundamental change you might find with Creo 6 is when you customize the tree. So here I've already customized it so that we have a feature name and feature number listed in the tree. Now you can customize this again by going to Show. This hasn't changed. Or actually going to the Settings option, going to Tree Columns, and being able to remove or add elements to the tree. When you add those categories to the tree, there's different ones to choose from: model parameters, feature parameters, layers, whatever it might be. But as you add those to the tree, you'll get different columns to appear. Now that is something that's been in Creo, isn't new. But what is new is this toggle the visibility of those columns. If I click on that, it will minimize it so they're no longer displayed. If I click on it again, it will expand the tree to be able to list all the changes that you've made, and you can customize that look fairly quickly. So those are some of the changes that we have to the fundamental design in Creo 6. Here we're going to take a look at Creo 6.0 updates in regards to part design and how things may have changed. First, we're going to take a look at the projection point function. If I have geometry, in this case a curve, I want to take the endpoint of this curve and project the point onto a surface. We'll go with this datum plane over here. I'm going to click on the point command, choose the endpoint of that three-dimensional curve, and then holding Control, I'll be able to select the new datum plane. Now it's trying to build references, but what's new here is under offset, we can use project instead. It's going to project that point onto the datum plane and give us point 0. Okay, now it creates that datum point there. Make sure we're actually seeing it. I'll turn that on and we can see it from the side. If I want to project a point down onto the datum plane below that curve, again, I would select on point, choose the endpoint of the curve, you hit the drop down arrow here and choose project, and then select the datum plane it goes down onto. Okay. Select OK, and it projects that point down into that location. Another update to Creo 6 is our default depth for extrusions. The value has basically the way it's calculated to come up with your default value for extrusion has been updated to try to guess a more accurate value. What I mean by that is if I build a brand new part, build a part here, want to build a sketch. So you place the sketch on that plane. I'm going to draw a simple rectangle, and it gives us our default value here, actually a square. I'm going to set that to 10. Okay, with that value of 10 being the only value it really has to calculate with, when I hit OK and tell it to extrude, notice the extrusion length is set to 10 automatically. Okay, if I hit cancel to that, went back into that sketch and modified that 10 to be 200. When I go to extrude and select on that extrude distance, it automatically comes as 200. Now this value doesn't necessarily have to match the one value we have in that sketch. It's just an oversimplified display of it, but it tries to take the dimensions that are in the sketch and kind of average them to come out with a reasonable extrusion length. You can always change this to be whatever you'd like, but it doesn't just guess a number. It actually interprets the dimensions of the sketch to figure out what thickness we might want, or at least a good starting point to work with. Now, another change that we have in Creo 6 is within the helix curve option. If you are building a helix curve, so I'm going to come in here and build a new part again. And to build this, I'm going to perform a sweep. We'll do a helical sweep. It also works with the volume helical sweep if you're building that. But either way, the approach for building the helical sweep is exactly the same. There's just an added option to be able to have a helical curve be created at the same time. So to build this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to references. It's asking me what profile do I want to use. I'm going to go to define, select a datum plane to use as my profile. When you're building a helical sweep, you're going to draw a center line that your helix spins around. You're going to draw a profile that your helix will, when rotating, will hit that curve each time as it spins and basically defines the radius of our helix. So in fact, I'll come in here and define a diameter from that line to the center line to that line again. Hit the middle mouse button to get the diameter value, and we'll set that to 150 as the diameter. The height will be 250, and I'll hit OK. Now, I still have to define what the cross section is going to be. If this is going to be like a spring, I will be able to draw my cross section, start with my circle there, and it creates that spring we see here. Now, this is what has been added. If we go into references, there's a new option here called Create Helical Trajectory Curve. If that is turned on, when I hit OK, it not only creates the spring, but it will also create a wireframe curve. Now, the wireframe curve here is covered up by that solid. What I can do is change my rendering style. Let's see. Let's go with wireframe. There we go. Now you can see that curve down the middle. If I was to modify that, go back to references and turn off the helical curve, it'll still build the spring, but it doesn't build the curve down the middle. If you want to reference that curve later, what you can do is let's modify this. Turn that back on for the helical curve. Now we have the wireframe. I can select that wireframe, which notice it selects it the whole feature, but I can copy that geometry and paste it right back in to the same location. Now I have just the curve by itself that I could use for other sweeps or for measurements or for whatever else I'm trying to get it to follow. Again, I can change my rendering style back, and we can see the wireframe curve in the middle of that spring, or if you're doing threads or anything else where you might need a helical curve. The last thing that was updated to the part design aspect of Creo 6 is the midplane option. The formula used to calculate what your midplane is going to be has been updated to hopefully guess the right midplane from the beginning, so you don't have to flip it as often. Not a big change, but you might notice a difference. For example, I'm going to build a datum plane. I'm going to select two surfaces, and it automatically comes up, and the idea is that it's going to guess the midplane of those two datum planes better than it did before. Less having to come in here and say no, bisector 1 instead of bisector 2. Okay, so it puts it between those two datum planes. If I came in here and tried to select two other datum planes, so I'll grab that surface and we'll grab that one. It tries to find the mid plane for us of those two, which I'm getting a 45-degree plane between them. Usually it's just trying to put it through the middle of the model instead of off to the side of the model. And those are some of the changes that you may notice in part design within Creo 6. Here we're going to take a look at the Creo 6.0 updates to the assembly tools. One of the first changes that you might notice is if you're using the reference viewer, that's found when you open an assembly, going to Tools and clicking on Reference Viewer. If you are selecting on a specific component, which I should do that first, go to Reference Viewer. It shows us the hierarchy of how things are connected with parent-child relationships and how those relationships are defined. But if you want to be able to find that element on the model, not only when you hover over them will it highlight those parts, but if you right-click, you can say Zoom to, and it will zoom in directly on that component. If I right-click on this one and say Zoom to, it shows me where that one exists. Another function that's available in both parts and assemblies is changes to the way in the inheritance feature can be controlled and modified through varied items. To do this, I'm going to create a part file. Works with assemblies as well when the parts are used within an assembly. I'm going to go to Get Data and use Merge and Inheritance. We'll be able to go to select the file we're inheriting from. We're basically trying to create a varied dimensions for this part. Mine is placed in here. I have this inheritance demo part. It's just a part with different features added to it. We need to place it in our new part, so we're making a copy of it. We'll set it as the default location where the datum planes match on top of the datum planes of the new part. With that, I will switch it up here to toggle inheritance. None of this should be new, and I'll be able to place it. But if I want to modify the varied items, instead of having to go to edit definition and modify them through the options menu, what you can do is simply select on it in the tree, right click, and we have this new varied items option. When selected, it allows us to define which elements we're varying. So on this new component we copied from the original, maybe I want to adjust the length of that extrusion. The new value is going to be, let's say 50 instead of 10. And maybe I also want to change by adding that hole. We'll say that the diameter of that hole instead of 3 is going to be 7. Now, in this new component I've created, I have that varied item where it changes to those lengths. The diameter of the hole is 7, the length is 50. And if I ever want to make modifications, I can select on it, right click, and choose varied items again to be able to make my changes. So that is new. Something else that you'll see with assemblies. I go back to our assembly. The insert here that controlled what you were building and where it was going has changed. So if you look at the bottom of this assembly, it no longer says insert here. Instead, it shows a little green line. You can drag that green line up to a different location of the tree, and now the insert here, instead of saying it, is located here with the green line, and if I was to add a component, it would be dropped in at that spot. Notice the other components have been deactivated or suppressed, so they're no longer showing. I can grab that and drag it back to the bottom, and I see those components brought in again. If I was to activate a component, I come in here and say activate that part because I want to modify it, it now also grays out not only on the screen but in the tree as well. There is an insert here for that specific component. It is the blue line. I can grab it and drag it up higher in the model. So we see the model get simplified back to its basic shape. I could build a new feature, so if I came over here to model and I wanted to drill a hole in it, I could build that hole and it would come in directly after the first feature. I can drag that down to see some of the features come in. Again, it just replaces the insert here. And then I can activate my main assembly to be able to work on the entire assembly again. One other function that has changed within our 6.0 Creo is if I go to this assembly here when I want to insert bolts, we can go to Tools and go to the Intelligent Fastener section. I'm going to place my Intelligent Fastener by choosing the curved surface, holding Control, choosing that face, the top for the bolt head, and that face for where the nut will go, and place it. Now that's the same, that hasn't changed. Once it's been placed, it's allowing me to choose if I want to put it in all the holes or just in one. I'm going to put it in just the single instance. Okay, again, that's no different. But now if I go to insert more, if I accidentally insert it where it's going to place them through all the holes and I already have one taken up, it will now give us an error message letting us know that there's already one in one of the positions. So to do that, I'm going to go in and insert it into this hole, grab that surface, grab this surface, hit OK. Here's the error message that comes up. A fastener exists in this reference. Do you want to continue? You can say yes, and it will duplicate in those locations as well. Or you can say no, but now we're able to define where we're placing them and how we already have one in that location. Those are some of the updates we've seen for assembly design within Creo 6.
In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at the updates to the detailed drawings inside Creo 6. First, we're going to see that if you build a new drawing file, there is an option that's been added to be able to automatically name the drawing file after the part or assembly that you're linking to it. So you don't have to manually type that in. By having it turned on, it will automatically generate the file name. If you turn it off, you can put in whatever you'd like. But now when I hit OK to this and hit OK to my new drawing window, it has the exact same name as the CAD file that I was working with. Another update to the detailed drawing tools, if I go to create a note, so I'm going to come in here with a note with a leader line. We have different references we can select on, but as you select on them, it will snap to different positions. So notice it's laying tangent to that line or laying perpendicular to it. Once that note with a leader line is placed, just place it, I'll hit the middle mouse button to place it there. I can write out my text, and the interface for the text tool has updated as well, giving us new options. We'll go ahead and place that. With that being placed, if I go back and modify that text, we'll again see the updated interface. Inside the text editor itself, there is a new function for being able to use symbols. Now, we could insert symbols before, however, now, if you're constantly using the same types of symbols over and over again, it will automatically lay them out here in this My Symbols category. The 7 most commonly used symbols will be listed here, the ones you've used in the past. If you start using other ones, they will replace the older ones up here. But I could choose one of my symbols from here. It'll replace the old symbol and include that into my text field. The next thing I want to show you that is a difference in Creo 6 is when you build a dimension on a location where two lines would intersect but don't actually intersect, like theoretically to this corner, what I would be able to do is select the select intersection, choose the two lines. I now will hit OK and tell it back to grab that missing line. Notice it's measuring to where those two lines will intersect. And it could be at any angle, doesn't have to be perpendicular like this. Once that dimension is placed, if you actually display by going back here and clicking on display in the dimension and turn on this enable intersection of witness lines, the witness lines will now show where that intersection is at, and it will overlap a little bit there. Now we can go into our settings and customize what that overlap is if you want it to be bigger or smaller, but it will include an overlap now where in older versions of Creo that overlap was not included. One other element that is different within Creo 6
is if we include a table. So I'll come in here and click the table command. I'll do a 3x4 table and place it on my drawing. The delete key now will delete contents of a table instead of having to right click and use delete contents. So if I type in names here, Mark, Tom, and Sam, if I no longer need the contents of one of those, I can select on it, I can hit delete on my keyboard, and it deletes the content. In older versions of Creo, you'd have to select on it and then choose the delete contents function here or from the dashboard to be able to get the same type of command, whatever it happens to be listed inside your cells. Taking a look at sheet metal and how it's been updated in Creo 6.0, a few of the changes you might see is when building a wall using the flat command, you'll be able to select the edge and it will automatically detect the other walls that it comes in contact with or other boundaries to that wall. What I mean by that is if I come over here to corner treatment, I can change the way the seam works, whether it is a seam or isn't. If there is, I can define it as being open or closed. If it is open, we can define things like if there's going to be a gap. So right now the gap is half the thickness of the model. I can make it 2 times the thickness, and we see not only the one wall we're creating is changing, but the neighboring wall is adjusting as well. I can come in and set it to blind, and then define the gaps ourselves, whichever values we need on one side or the other. Define an overlap, so here's overlap on one side or overlap it the other way, and they adjust. Other thing we can do is we can go to the relief and be able to define the relief for both walls at the same time. So I can come in here and define it as being a rectangular relief, and I can adjust the values, or a let's see, obrown relief, and we can adjust that. If we wanted to adjust the corner, not just the bend relief, we can adjust it so that here we have a sort of V-notch, a circular relief. We'll see it adjust here, and we can adjust the sizes of that here. Now it's set on a thickness. I'll make it 2 times the thickness. Hit the check mark, and now I can see that round relief that's been added to that corner along with all the other customizations. Again, basically they've modified it so that it automatically adjusts its neighboring wall rather than go back and manually change it. Other adjustments that we have in sheet metal is there has been updates to the regenerate function, so to regenerate faster. Things that involve sheet metal cuts, if they are not affected by the modification, will regenerate faster and basically be ignored when the regenerate is performed instead of having to go through and update all those features even though they haven't been modified. And one other change that we will see in our sheet metal is if we go to editing, merge, and merge walls. The interface for merge walls has been integrated into the dashboard as opposed to having contextual menus. So in earlier versions of Creo, you had a contextual menus that asked you questions. You had to click on them and be able to select on all the references. Now it's updated to basically the updated version of Creo where you have a dashboard and drop-down menus to be able to perform your different functions for merging your walls into one.